Not much is usually said about René Descartes' first major work, Le Monde or The World, and probably the reason why being is because he himself never published it. Because of his fear of the Catholic Church, for in it contains a similar heliocentric worldview which Galileo Galilei supported, which made him suffer.
Here Descartes wrote to his friend Mersenne. But in the meantime I tried to find out in Leiden and Amsterdam whether Galileo's world system was available, as I thought I had heard that it was published in Italy last year. I was told that it had indeed been published, but that all copies had been burned at Rome, and that Galileo had been convicted and fined. I was so surprised by this that I nearly decided to burn all my papers, or at least let no one see them. For I couldn't imagine that he, an Italian, and I believe in favor with the Pope, could have been made a criminal just because he tried, as he certainly did, to establish that the earth moves. I must admit that if this view is false, then so too are the entire foundations of my philosophy, for it can be demonstrated from them quite clearly. And it is such an integral part of my treatise that I couldn't remove it without making the whole work defective. But for all that, I wouldn't want to publish a discourse which had a single word that the Church disapproved of, so I prefer to suppress it rather than publish it in a mutilated form.
But I still think it's a very important book in order to understand where Descartes really is coming from in his later works. So here I am in the village of Descartes, so let's talk about the world. If one were to read Le Monde without knowing it was Descartes who wrote it, one would probably only think that it's a book written by an old scientist with theories that since long have been falsified. And maybe this is why people don't really talk about this book that much. But I still think it's an important one. But so keep in mind that most of the theories that I talk about in this episode are actually false. So it's a little bit more of a science history lesson.
The universe, according to Descartes, is a logical and mechanistic world that we can understand through our pursuit of science. For him, instead of the classic four elements, earth, wind, fire and water, René proposes three subsets of only one, matter, and the way in which he categorizes these subsets is through light. This is why the first section of the book is named A Treatise on Light.
So Descartes proposes three elements. Firstly, fire, that which produces light. Secondly, air, that which light can travel through. And thirdly, earth, that which reflects light. So as you understand, this cosmology is based around the concept of light. And René also acknowledges that our sensations compared with the things in themselves can actually be different. The first chapter is actually named on the difference of our sensation and the things that produce them. An interesting part about this cosmology is that Descartes thought that there was no such thing as void or vacuum. Apparently, he had a very intense argument with Pascal about the subject matter. Pascal insisted upon the existence of vacuum. But here René Descartes wrote in the Treatise on Light,
If the entire space beyond the circle ABCD were void, that is, were filled only with matter that was not able to resist the actions of other bodies or to have any significant effect. For this is how we should construe the term void. Then all the parts of the heaven in the circle ABCD would leave it first, followed by those of the air and the water, and finally those of the earth as well, each moving more quickly to the extent that it finds itself less attached to the rest of the mass. So here Descartes argues that if there is such a thing as void, then gravity wouldn't exist, since there would be no weight that pushes us down towards the earth. All the atoms would leave towards the void. And here he also writes on the same topic. Although they are enough to persuade us that those spaces where we sense nothing are filled with the same matter and contain at least as much of that matter as those occupied by the bodies that we perceive. Thus, when a vessel is full of gold or lead, for example, it contains no more matter than when we think it empty.
So if everything is just atoms that are stacked on top of each other, how is movement possible? I mean, if I want to go from point A to point B, there has to be some kind of void that I moved into, right? So in this worldview, shouldn't everything just be standing still? Well, no. Descartes explained it as that everything moves in a large displacement of atoms in a circular motion. So when I move my hand, I am pushing atoms forward and displacing them, and they move forward, displacing all the atoms of the air with atoms that then comes back in a circular motion to my hand, which pushes it forward.
I would have trouble replying to this had I not learned from the variety of observations that all motions that occur in the world are in some way circular. That is, when a body leaves its place, it always enters into that of another, and this latter into that of another, and so on to the last body, which at the same instant occupies the first.
This might seem like an odd theory to our modern ears, but if you think about it, all the planets move in a circular, or well, elliptical fashion. So it's really not a far-fetched idea to believe that everything else moves similarly.
Here is a drawing from the book depicting how Descartes thought our solar system looked like. And as you can see, all the dots show his way of thinking that everything moves in a circular fashion. And S is of course our sun, and A and E are stars, or centers of other solar systems. So Descartes really wasn't far off from our present-day view of our universe. Of course, I have to add that he had studied Tycho Brahe and others alike, but still.
Before we move on to the Treatise on Man, Descartes lists 12 properties of light, since light being so important in his cosmology.
The principal properties of light are: 1. That it extends circularly in all directions around those bodies one calls luminous. 2. To any distance whatever. 3. Instantaneously. 4. And ordinarily in straight lines, which should be taken as rays of light. 5. And that several of these rays coming from different points can collect together at the same point. 6. Or coming from the same point can go out towards different points. 7. Or coming from different points and going to different points can pass through the same point without impeding one another, 8. And that they can sometimes impede one another, namely when they are of very unequal force, that of some rays being far greater than that of others. 9. And finally, that they can be diverted by reflection. 10. Or by refraction. 11. And that their force can be increased. 12. Or diminished by the different disposition or qualities of the matter that receives them. Here are the principal qualities observed in light, and all of them are in accord with this action, as you shall see.
Alright, so let's talk a little bit about the second part of the book, which is named A Treatise on Man. This is straight up an anatomy lesson with a few oddities. And here Descartes' mechanical worldview really shines through. The first chapter is even named The Machine of the Body.
Since everything in the universe is ordered and works according to standard mechanics, then so the human body of course has to work in a similar fashion. There should be nothing magic about the human body. This might seem obvious to us, but remember what time period this was written.
What sparked this theory is probably the appearance of automatons during this time. If an automaton can perform human-like motion, then why should there be anything magic with real human motion?
I say that you should consider that these functions follow in this machine simply from the disposition of the organs as wholly naturally as the movement of a clock or other automaton follow from the disposition of its counterweights and wheels. To explain these functions, then, it is not necessary to conceive of any vegetative or sensitive soul, or any other principle of movement or life, other than its blood and its spirits, which are agitated by the heat of the fire that burns continuously in its heart, and which is of the same nature as those fires that occur in inanimate bodies.
Descartes theorized about something which he named animal spirits, which is produced in the brain in the support of blood. And he characterizes it as a very fine wind or a lively and pure flame.
This certainly sounds odd that we have a fine wind in our body, but this was probably an analog to the automatons at the time, for they sometimes work through pneumatics. So if a wind, so to say, is enabling an automaton to move, then so should the human body work. And so, without any preparation or alteration, except being separated from the larger part and retaining the extreme speed that the heat of the heart has given them, they cease to have the form of blood and are called animal spirits.
So the universe and even our body works according to standard mechanics. But that sounds oddly materialistic for being a theory that comes from the 17th century, don't you think? Well, of course, René believed that us humans possessed a rational soul. But more about the rational soul in an upcoming episode. So make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the famous cogito ergo sum. But as always, thank you so much for watching, everyone. Take care until the next one.